Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. Just got back from Crypto.com Arena, where the Lakers won 116-110 over the hottest team in the NBA, in the Memphis Grizzlies. Grizzlies entered this game number 2 in the West. They had won 4 straight, 11 of 12. And this, to me, was arguably the Lakers' best win of the season since the Sacramento win in their 3rd game of the season. I think if you look win by win, and I will go over it a little bit later in today's show, this, to me, in terms of quality of opponent and context of the situation, I think this was arguably their best win since that season opening homestand for them. They improved to 14-12. They are tied for 9th in the West. Technically, they are 10th, but tied for 9th from a record perspective. LeBron James returned, and he had, I would say, a solid game, all things considered. But we did get an update on his injury status, and I will touch on that. There was a near scare with Anthony Davis with his left shoulder, and he briefly exited, and it looked like the Lakers were about to lose control of the game. There was a updated starting lineup, a new 5th starter that seems like it's going to be the case moving forward in terms of what JJ was looking for from the 5th starter. And I have to ask the question, are the Lakers back? That is something I will touch on with one of my takeaways. So before we get started, you guys know the drill. As always, for those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications so you never miss a video or a live stream, and like and comment on this episode. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, leave a 5-star review. I will be going about an hour today. I have a fancy little timer here that because if I don't have a timer, I will just yap and yap and yap. So as you guys know, so I'm gonna try and hold myself to the timer, go for about an hour. And as a reminder for those who have not yet seen the community post, I will be going live tomorrow / now it's past midnight. So today at 5 p.m. Pacific time for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I will be taking all of your questions about trades, LeBron, starters, rotation, JJ, whatever you want to ask me. Personal stuff, I always enjoy the personal questions. So just a quick reminder before we get going here that I will be going live at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Monday, December 16th. But with all that said, let's get into it. So takeaway number 1 is LeBron returns, but with a bit of a caveat. And the caveat is that LeBron said that this foot injury is going to be something that he's going to have to manage for the foreseeable future, potentially for the rest of the season. So to back up, LeBron finally provided a timeline for what was going on over the past 9 days or so. So LeBron had a 9-day, 2-game absence. We could even say 2 practice absence. He was not there for the Get What You Need day, not there for the Lakers practice on Wednesday. And so he said that coming back from Atlanta, so remember, he injures his left foot in the Miami game now, a week and a half ago, and he is questionable for the Atlanta game, decides to push through it and play. But on the flight back and on that Saturday after they'd gotten back to LA, he said he felt some pain and discomfort, and he had a feeling he probably wasn't going to be able to play on Sunday. So he has a conversation with JJ on Sunday, goes through his pregame routine, workout, and decides with his longtime trainer Mike Mancias and the Lakers that it's not wise for him to play on Sunday. So they devised this plan that he's going to get a break, and he's not going to participate Tuesday in the Get What You Need day or Wednesday in the practice, and then that there's also a chance he's not going to travel to Minnesota depending on how he's feeling. So ultimately misses Tuesday and Wednesday. Did not disclose his location or what exactly he was doing. He did say that he was rehabbing and still working out, still trying to stay in shape, that he didn't want to get out of game shape just because he wasn't practicing or playing on Friday. But then they decide that he wasn't ready to return on Friday and that it would be advantageous to have a 9-day break. So he ends up not traveling to Minnesota, skipping that game. Also, as a fun little side note, he did mention that he, of course, watched all of Bronny's games. Bronny has scored 62 points over his last his last 3 G League games, and has done so on about 43% shooting. And so LeBron said that he was thrilled with Bronny's performance, and that in his opinion, his message to Bronny was the work will always prevail, and that just tune out all the noise, just keep working, stay aggressive. And he felt that Bronny's really shown some growth at the G League level. And I think if you go back and watch the highlights or possessions from those games, like it does, Bronny is playing with a certain level of confidence and poise that he wasn't playing with earlier in the season, both regular season, but G League, even go back to Summer League. So there's been some real growth there with Bronny. But back to LeBron. So he says that he rehabs and he's still kind of practicing, training while he's away. But he said he felt pretty good entering the game in terms of just having a bit of a mental reset and a bit of a physical reset, but that his foot, it's something that he's going to have to manage every single day in terms of treatment, in terms of rehabbing it. And this is something that he's been dealing with for a few years. Now, one note, and I've seen some misinformation out there in terms of LeBron's previous foot injury. So LeBron injured his right foot against the Dallas Mavericks in the 2023 season, and that was the foot that caused him to eventually go to the LeBron James of feet. That was also when Dennis Schroeder let it slip that LeBron made a trip to Germany. And so I wanted to clarify that people are referencing that the injury he had then is the same injury he had now in terms of the same foot, and it's not. I tried to find a previous left foot injury for LeBron. I could not find it. So he said it's something that's been lingering. It's been bothering him for a few years. I could not find it. Doesn't mean it's not true. He has obviously dealt with ankle injuries and knee injuries and like lower extremity injuries. So maybe there was an accumulation. I mean, the guy's almost 40, he played 22 years. So you would think that his ankles, his feet, his knees, like all that stuff is going to have aches and pains. So maybe this is something that he's just played through. He's been largely an Iron Man throughout his career, playing through, I'm sure, various ailments that we just never knew about. So maybe this was one of them, but I cannot find a left foot injury recently. And again, that doesn't mean maybe I just couldn't, maybe there was one or a previous one that I missed, but I tried to kind of scour it and find the different injury histories and for LeBron, and did not see anything on the left foot. So just wanted to note that. But moving forward, one thing that JJ said is it's going to continue to be a collaborative process between LeBron, Mike Mancias, his personal longtime trainer, and the Lakers. But one thing that JJ is considering and that he tried out tonight a bit was playing LeBron in shorter bursts. So more like 3 to 5 minute bursts, and him potentially just subbing in and out more frequently and keeping his minutes. Because ultimately, LeBron's been averaging 35 minutes a game, and tonight he played 34. So it was basically in line with the role that LeBron has had from a minutes perspective. But JJ talked about just trying to make sure that he's not gassed and that playing him too long of stretches. So one thing that they're kind of experimenting with is just keeping his shifts a bit shorter and seeing that if taking more frequent breaks will allow LeBron to remain a bit fresher and not tire out the way. Because I'll say, like, LeBron is asked out of several games this year in a manner that I would say is rare for him. He rarely asks out of a game to get a breather, and it's felt like that's happened more frequently this season, especially earlier in games. So I think that's clearly something that they've been monitoring and trying to come up with a plan for. So moving forward, it seems like this is going to be something LeBron is going to be managing. I don't know if that means he's going to potentially sit back-to-backs or maybe 3 games in 4 nights. Like, that part is not clear as of right now. So that's why I said, like, LeBron returns, but there's a bit of a caveat of this sounds to be, or seems to be rather, a more serious situation than initially expected. And there was a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of speculation. I said, I didn't really want to comment on the speculation or speculate myself, but we still don't know where exactly he was, if he was in LA, if he went home to Cleveland or Akron or whatever, or if he went to visit another foot specialist or something. But, I don't think we're going to get that answer. But, unless they add Dennis Schroeder back to the locker room, because Dennis would just always inadvertently spill the beans. But aside from that, it seems like this is going to be something LeBron has to manage. Now, as for his performance, 18 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, did have 5 turnovers, a steal, 2 blocks. He had an incredible sequence early in the game where he gets an emphatic dunk in transition, then goes down, has a chase down block on Desmond Bane, and then comes down and Rui misses a layup and he tips it in. And that was just for a guy who at times has appeared more human than he has in previous seasons. LeBron, from an athleticism and energy perspective, I thought was great tonight for the most part. 7-17 shooting, 3-6 from deep. So he was 4 for 11 on 2-point shots. I thought, as has been the case at times this season, kind of struggled to finish through contact. And what was weird with this game was that there was 58 combined fouls. These two teams averaged 37 combined fouls, so that was a plus 21 difference, which is a significant difference. JJ didn't go so far as to criticize or complain, but he did note how strange it was after the game. But looking at that, LeBron went 1 for 4 at the free throw line, but only 4 free throws. Felt like there was some high contact situations in the paint where he continues to not get the benefit of the doubt. But all things considered, like, I think given how much time he actually missed, 9 days is a lot in terms of going without playing in a game. I thought he was a bit, had better stretches defensively. JJ and AD talked about his defensive communication and him being a vocal leader and helping them out in terms of calling coverages and just manning the back line from a vocal perspective. So, one interesting thing though is he, from a plus minus perspective, he continues to be among the worst starter. I mean, he's last in the team in plus minus, but was the only starter that was a neutral in plus minus. He had a plus minus of 0. All 4 other starters were +7 or better, and that was partly because he was in this bench unit with Christian Coloco, Dalton Knecht, Gabe Vincent, and D'Lo that just did not play well tonight. So all 4 of those bench guys had negative plus minuses, and LeBron was at 0. So all things considered, though, again, I thought like he looked more energetic, more engaged. He seemed to have a bit more verve to him, and we'll see how long that lasts in terms of he's not obviously going to be taking 9 days off in between games. And this seems to be, again, a more serious situation potentially with this foot injury. But LeBron is back, and I thought he was a big part of the Lakers offense, looking much better. They were spamming a lot of side pick and rolls with him and AD. Just 2-man game with those two, but also him being more of a screener. I thought there were a lot more times of Austin or D'Lo bringing the ball up, and then LeBron was kind of in the corner on the wing, and he wasn't necessarily initiating the offense. So it seemed like they kind of went back to some of the earlier stuff they did in the season, and that also resulted in AD matching his season high with 40 points. But LeBron, again, will have to manage, he's gonna have to manage this foot situation, and it is something that we'll see how long it lingers, and we'll see how much of an effect it has, and ultimately what the Lakers' plan is in terms of, is it simply the shorter bursts with the minutes, or is he potentially resting back-to-backs or certain stretches that are a bit more strenuous from a workload perspective? But we knew at some point that the workload conversation was going to reach a point of having to make some tough decisions, and it seems like we're starting to get there now. with LeBron, because I never felt the mid 30s minutes were really sustainable. And I do think at some point they're going to have to reduce that down to like 32, 33. I think he's playing probably a bit too much. But takeaway number 2 for me is we have another new starting lineup, and it feels like every other show I'm doing a takeaway about the starting lineup, but it seems like for now, for the time being, this is the starting lineup that JJ Redick wants to roll with. So for some context, of course, with Austin Reeves missing 5 games, LeBron missing the last 2, the Lakers went a stretch there of 6 games without having Austin or LeBron in the starting lineup. So they've not had a chance to really have a new starting lineup, or even just to have their old starting lineup. But since then, Dalton Knecht moved to the bench. He's been in a shooting slump. Dan Wojcicki of the LA Times tweeted it out that he's 3 for 30 on 3-pointers in December, which is just a wild. I mean, that's 10%. And for a guy who just had one of the hottest stretches of any shooter in the league and some of the best shooting performances of the season, and then going into the cold stretch he's been on. Lakers obviously also moved D'Lo to the bench and have been seemingly reluctant to go back to the Austin D'Lo starting lineup, despite that pairing being one of the few positive high usage pairings, and that starting lineup being one of the few higher usage positive lineups for the Lakers. So it really came down to Gabe Vincent versus Max Christie, which is something I've talked about the last couple of streams, that it seemed like that was the way it was trending, that JJ wanted a little bit more balance in the backcourt, and that it was probably going to come down to Gabe versus Max. The last stream I was asked about Max versus Gabe and who I would start. I said Max. I think he's been playing better. He's also younger, more athletic, bigger. And that's the decision that the Lakers came to. So JJ had said during pregame, actually, I asked JJ, you haven't had the starters for a while. With some of the rotational changes, now that everyone's back, or outside of the bigs, like, who are you considering starting for that 5th spot? And JJ said that he was looking for a point of attack defender who didn't need the ball in his hands, could be more of a complementary, low usage guy, and a guy who could also make open threes and keep a defense honest. So that to me kind of signified that he probably wasn't going to Cam Reddish, and that it was between Gabe Vincent and Max Christie. And ultimately, what was Max Christie, I think that was the right call. Max had one of the best defensive games I've seen from him that I can remember. He was the primary assignment on Ja Morant. There was some stretches where Cam was on him, where Gabe was on him, but for the most part, the Lakers kind of matched Max's minutes to Ja Morant's. Ja Morant did have 20 points, but did so on 6 of 21 shooting, and had more turnovers, 7, than assists, 6. So I thought Max did a great job of just crouching down, getting low, and really shading Ja Morant into help situations, shading him into AD, shading him into Rui or LeBron, whoever was the low man, and just did a good job of contesting with him. And this is where I think we see some of the strengths of Max Christie defensively, where when he has a size advantage over someone, he could do a really good job of just enveloping them and making things difficult. And I thought even like the first possession that he guarded Ja drew a foul, and that could have thrown Max off. That could have kind of been a sign of how that matchup was going to go. But I thought Max had a goldfish memory tonight, responded really well, and to me, like, looked like the type of guy that the Lakers need in that 5th starter spot, because to me, he's probably been, all things considered, their best two-way player outside of AD in terms of like contributing positively on both ends. And that hasn't been the case offensively throughout the totality of the season. But if you look at his numbers the last 3 weeks, he's been shooting 37% on threes. He's had multiple double-digit scoring performances, just had 15 points, which was his career high. Tonight had 7 points and had 4 fouls, but I thought it was nice to see him being aggressive with the fouls, had a block. Lakers were +7 in his 29 minutes. But I thought but between Max and Gabe, JJ talked. So JJ then after the game admitted that it was between Gabe and Max, and that it was a tough decision, and it was a decision that he and the coaching staff really thought about for extensively, but that ultimately it came down to they felt Max was ready to start, was ready for this moment. Both in terms of his current production, but also his future production, and him being a 21-year-old in his third season, and just the growth that they've seen from him over the past month. They felt like that he was ready for this moment, and that this is something that, whether he continues to start long term or eventually moves back to the bench, which I assume would be the case if the Lakers make a series of moves, that. Or maybe not. Like maybe he keeps this spot. I don't know, but they have been looking for more athleticism in the backcourt. I thought Max provided that tonight. And either way, I think he's proving to be right now a key rotation piece for them, whether he's a starter, whether he's coming off the bench. And I think as they look to make moves, I think Max should probably be. I'm not saying he's untouchable by any means, because I think really the only two untouchable guys on the roster should be LeBron and AD. But as they look for like that inner circle of guys to try and keep, I think that group is probably Austin, Dalton, and Max. And it seems like Rui's actually in that group too, because JJ has talked glowingly of him, especially recently, his coachability and just buying into what they're asking him to do. He played the most minutes tonight, 38 minutes. So it seems like Rui is a big part of what the Lakers are trying to do. And I think among like the mid-sized guys of Rui, D'Lo, Vando, and Gabe, he seems to be the guy least likely to be traded. But I just to bring it back to Max, I thought that this was the type of performance that the Lakers were betting on over the summer. And again, this wasn't like there are lottery teams that have good scoring guards, all-star level guards, right? But this was the hottest team in the league with one of the most dynamic and athletic scoring guards in the league. And I thought Max held his own for the most part. And Ja got him a couple times, but that's going to happen. You're never, it's hard to find a player that's going to just shut down a Ja Morant or, pick your favorite athletic guard. But for the most part, I thought Max did a good job contesting him, forcing him into help, and just making his life difficult. And it was really reflected in the numbers of, again, 6 of 21 shooting and 7 turnovers compared to 6 assists. So I thought Max, that was the right call to move to him. I think like D'Lo had a rough game, and I guess let me go back. So I'd been advocating a bit for the OG starting lineup, just because at this point the Lakers have so many lineup combinations that have been negative, and that includes some of the higher usage Max lineups. But with the understanding that they were not going to go back to the OG starting lineup, if it really came down to Max versus Gabe, I think they made the right choice. And I think Max has earned more playing time. I think he's played really well, really dating back to that San Antonio, New Orleans trip where he got back into the rotation after being out of it. And I think he needed that kind of break early in the season in terms of being benched for a few games and really just playing in garbage time. And I think that time he was able to reflect and really find himself in his game. And I think he's really been solid, and he'll still have some shots that I don't love or some turnovers that can be frustrating, like young player turnovers. But for the most part, I think he's looked a lot more confident and aggressive and assertive. And I think that's been a pretty positive, like, linear progression with him. So I think that was the right move. And so the lineup played 20 minutes tonight. So it was a heavy, like, JJ really leaned into that lineup. They were just +3. And part of that, Memphis is some of Memphis's lineups, especially in the fourth quarter, like once they went to Edey, that kind of shifted the game. So did AD's shoulder injury, but +3, and then 102 offensive rating, 100 net rating. So a +2 net rating, but that's an elite, like best in the league level defense. Also worst in the league level offense. And that's something that I think they'll need to figure out, because some of the lineups with Max have tended to struggle offensively. But considering who the other 4 players are, like Rui had a really quiet night. Again, LeBron had a somewhat inefficient night. Austin was 6 of 15, did have 19 and 8, but I thought it was a bit out of rhythm at times. So like I think this was more of a floor or on the lower side of offensive outcomes for the starting group. And I think moving forward against lesser opponents and just as they get more of a rhythm and more continuity, I think they're going to be better on that end. And they'll probably regress and slip a bit defensively, but I think this is a group that could be pretty good. And it also felt like it brought balance to the rotation where LA was able to pull LeBron and pull, I want to say I think it was pull LeBron and pull Max, and then go to eventually Dalton, D'Lo, and Gabe, and kind of just shuffle that mix up. And yeah, I think with Gabe and Cam and also D'Lo and Dalton, you kind of have 2 offensive guys, 2 defensive guys, and you can mix and match depending on how the game's going. And I think they still have to figure that out. But for the most part, I kind of liked how the rotation looked tonight. And then takeaway number 3, before we get into the Q&A, I will just say, I'll pose the question to the chat. Are the Lakers back? Because to me, this was their best win in, I can't remember. Like, I legitimately think, I'm going to pull it up here. I legitimately think this is their best win since that opening homestand. So I'm going to pull it up here for you guys. But so let's go through it here. So Minnesota, Phoenix, and Sacramento were all good wins. Toronto is not a good team. Philadelphia was without Embiid and Maxey. Toronto is not a good team. It was a good win, decisive win, a blowout win. Memphis was without Ja and Bane. At San Antonio, close one. At New Orleans, they were completely decimated. Like at San Antonio, up to this point, is probably the best win. Then home versus Utah. Then at San Antonio, I think this is the best win among this whole group. And LA nearly got, like, the Orlando win would have been the best of all of this. But at San Antonio, they win decisively. Then they have at Utah, home versus Portland. Then they beat Memphis. Like, Memphis is by far the best team that the Lakers have beaten since, I mean, really, if we're being honest, like, they're the best team they've beaten this season. And again, I know they'd beaten them previously, but no Ja, no Bane. So I thought opening night was a statement about the JJ Redick era. The Phoenix game was a nice win after getting down big. Sacramento was like conquering the demons. So I think all 3 of those wins, you could make a case for best win of the season. But since then, the Lakers have basically only beaten bad teams or injured teams. And I think, okay, so I will respond. I see something in the chat that I will, well, I'll just respond to it now. Puppy Chow 302, Jovan says best win too often. I think Memphis played terribly today. Lakers did okay. I will say I was pretty underwhelmed by Memphis's offense. I thought that there were stretches where I didn't know what they were doing offensively, but the part I will push back and disagree with you on is I've been saying for a while the Lakers haven't beaten a good team in a long time. And I've stood by that statement. And I would say, like, I've said you can only play the schedule in front of you. And that's something I believe because you can only play the schedule in front of you. But like, even during the 6-game win streak, the one knock on that win streak was all the teams they were beating were bad. And again, Memphis and a Philly team that were missing, I would say, the 2 best players in both instances. I mean, 2 of the 3 best players, depending on how you view Bane versus Jackson and Maxey versus Paul George. I think Maxey's better than Paul George. So in both cases, like, those were 2 decimated teams that clearly were not at full capacity. And then it's the Torontos, it's the Utahs. So maybe I've been hyperbolic with, like, best win in a while or best half of or quarter of whatever. But I I would say this to me is better than any of the other previous wins. Honestly, going back to the first homestand, I don't like the San Antonio one. I guess is in competition, but to me, Memphis is just such a better team than San Antonio. And again, Memphis had won 4 in a row and 11 of 12. So Memphis was one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest team in the NBA. They are tough. They're deep, and these two teams don't like each other. They played some close games. I do think it's a more advantageous matchup for the Lakers. Obviously, they're at home, but I will slightly disagree. Like, if this was a lesser opponent, and I would maybe agree with you, but I will I will disagree with this. But with all that said, to me, this is the best win since the beginning of the season. And I think this is the type of win that should put pressure on the Lakers front office. If I'm JJ Redick, if I'm LeBron, if I'm just a stakeholder, like, I'm looking at this game, like, because to me, the Lakers had a up until AD's injury. So that's another thing that so AD goes down. Zach Edey almost took out AD and Austin Reeves. He yanks on AD's left shoulder, and AD gets a stinger. And he had gotten a stinger a couple of games ago, and he's clearly in pain. He tries to play through it. First he falls to the ground. He's in pain. They're working on his shoulder. He gets up. You could tell he can barely move his arm. Next defensive possession, there's a loose ball, and he goes to reach down for it. He could barely reach down for it. So he asks out of the game. He goes back to the locker room. And at that point, the Lakers are up by 20 points. By the time there was 5.5 minutes left in the third quarter. By the time the quarter was over, LA was up by 9. They had been outscored 16-5 to close the third quarter. And it looked like some of these recent, some of the previous losses where AD goes out and all of a sudden they just fall apart. And it looked like they were about to probably lose the game. And I think if AD had not returned, they probably would have lost the game, because he scored 12 of his 40 points over the final 9 minutes, and he really made an impact. And he also helped foul out Jaren Jackson Jr., who had been Memphis's best player. So I thought AD was, again, commendable, playing through injury and returning. He easily could have called it a night. He said he was still in pain after the game. And I even saw first couple minutes he was out there, he could barely move his arm. And even going into the timeout, he was high-fiving everybody across his body with his right arm and kind of blocking his left arm. So he was clearly in pain, and he played through it. But that really shifted the tone and the tenor of the game. And part of that run, Zach Edey was in there, Luke Kennard was in there, and Memphis kind of figured out an offensive lineup that could actually score against the Lakers. And then that helped them in the fourth quarter, kind of make this more of a game. But I think all things considered, this was a really, really good win. I thought that this was their best two-way performance in a while, but again, just beating a good opponent. If you look through the recent wins, dating back to honestly the first homestand, there aren't many. Again, I would say San Antonio twice are probably the only two good wins in terms of quality of opponent. And I think we'll see how, so I'm asking the question, but I'm also answering it in terms of, I don't think the Lakers are back yet, because I'd like to see more than one good game. I'd like to see them go to Sacramento and at least split, if not win both. I'd like to see them come back and beat Detroit. I'd like to see them beat Golden State on Christmas. Those are, you're stringing together a good stretch here, a winning streak, or a stretch of 4 wins in 5 games, 5 wins in 6 games. That to me is a sign that this team is back and headed in the right direction. And this is a really pivotal stretch of the season. Trade season has officially started with December 15th passing. We've already seen a couple deals for teams in need of positional help. Golden State with the Anthony Melton going down, traded for Dennis Schroeder. Indiana with their backup bigs going down, traded for Thomas Bryant. So trades, a couple trades have already happened. I would say on the smaller side of things, but that's kind of the new reality with the NBA. And I think for the Lakers, if they can use this as a launching point to a bit of a better stretch here in terms of, again, four out of five, 4 out of 6, like start to make some headway up the Western Conference standings and make this a legitimate conversation in terms of this team being worth investing in. Like I think they are, but I think it's hard to make that case when they're 9th or 10th in the West, right? Like they did that before and it worked out. They made the conference finals, but I'm not quite sure them being 9th or 10th in the West is really going to get them to give up those picks. So I would say this was the best from a vibes perspective. This was the best vibes around the Lakers in a while, really in weeks. And like the Portland game, you know, I wasn't there, but even with that, there's only so much excitement when you beat a team like Portland. Like I think beating, like I think it's been weighing on them too of their record against teams above 500 and just some of these close losses or embarrassing losses to really good teams. So I think this was a really good win, and there's a lot to be encouraged by. We will see. Like this has been a roller coaster of a season. We'll see if it sustains. We'll see if they can keep this up. We'll see if they can stay healthy. LeBron's got the foot. AD's got the shoulder. He still has not been official. Like, you know, he said he's fine, or, you know, he's in pain, but he's fine. Lakers have not said whether or not, like, what the designation is, if he's going to be available. So, like, AD could not be available on Thursday, and all of a sudden we're having a different conversation. But for now, with how tonight went, I think there was a lot to be encouraged by. This was again, in my opinion, best win since the Sacramento win, and that was over a month and a half ago. And I think, yeah, like for a stretch here, it's been really negative. There's been a lot of pessimism, and I get it. But after tonight, maybe things will turn around, at least momentarily, for the Lakers. But with all that, let's get into the Q&A. I see we have a few super chats. First one, T-Rav3, spirit of the team was way different. Thoughts why? It's a good question. I think part of it is it's like a chicken or the egg thing where when you are playing well and winning, like you tend to have a better energy. And for the Lakers, it's now 2 out of the past 3 games. Of course, the Minnesota game was a disappointing outcome and disappointing offensive performance. But it does feel like this, I would say, you know, I wasn't at the practice on Wednesday, but in talking to people and I get all of the transcriptions and all the audio. So just like listening to people talk and just hearing things, it did feel like the vibe was already starting to shift a bit on that Wednesday. And that was also coming off of the Portland win. But I think the Lakers have, I think guys have, there's been a shifting with certain guys and their roles and the rotation. And I think there's been a little bit more clarity now where I think they have committed to this new starting lineup. I think, you know, it was kind of a rotating thing of like, is it going to be D'Lo? Is it going to be Dalton? Is it going to be Gabe? Oh wait, now, or, you know, also, is it going to be Cam? Now it's going to be Max. So I feel like there's been a little bit more stability in terms of the last like week or so. Of course, LeBron was gone and that kind of undermines that, but it's a good question. I think having some time to practice and have a break, like sometimes you'll see teams come back with a renewed energy and spirit. Like LeBron talked about it just for himself, that's how he felt coming out of this stretch. So obviously not everyone else had a 9-day break, but I think it helps when you play well. And they still haven't made shots, and that was something JJ kind of joked about, that the guy asked JJ about AD's mid-range jumper because it's been falling the last few games, and I was just like, what does it do for him? What does it do for the offense? And JJ then, he'll often do this thing where he answers the question and then he has another point that he wants to make that's like sometimes related, sometimes not. And then he brought up the 3-point shooting because tonight 10 for 34, 29%. He was like, you know, we can't make a three. It was like if we are, you know, can't get a layup and we're not taking threes or we're not making our threes and we're going to be taking long twos instead, we better make those mother effers. And that was the exact word he used, mother effer, which was some good restraint from JJ. Did not drop an F-bomb. But I thought, so I say all that to say, like, I think in general they played much better. Like We asked Max after the game, like, why has the defense been better? JJ said that the Minnesota game was their best defensive performance of the season. Then they had another solid defensive performance tonight. And Max is like, honestly, it's an effort thing. We're just playing with more effort, and we're kind of more engaged. And like, so I don't know what, maybe I'm going to do some digging and try and figure it out. But for now, it there hasn't really been a reason to pinpoint necessarily, other than that break, I think, kind of rejuvenating this group. And they had a competitive game in Minnesota with no LeBron, and then they just had a nice win over Memphis. So I can't point to one reason necessarily, but I do think the break was ultimately helpful. Jay Hoodie, thank you for the super chat. I said going to the season that Max should be the starting 2 next to AR or D'Lo and trade for a DFS type of player, or just start Vando. This team isn't far off and is playing hard. Yeah, and if you guys, so for those who have been following me for a while, if you go back right before the season, I did an episode of Buha's block on 5 lineups I wanted to see, and this was one of the lineups of Austin, Max, Rui, LeBron, and AD. And I had said at the time, like, I think they're going to start D'Lo. I think they're like, and JJ came out and said that early on, but even before he had said that, I was like, I think that's going to be the starting lineup. But if it doesn't work, because the D'Lo Austin pairing is a little awkward in terms of kind of minimizing both of those guys, I thought at the time Max should be the guy to get that crack at the starting group. And from a financial perspective, it made sense in terms of them investing in him. And like, Gabe was coming off a disappointing season. He was also a bit small, and Cam was a minimum guy who picked up his option. So felt like Max was the natural guy. And even going back to the preseason, he was often the 6th man in a lot of scenarios, or early in some of those preseason games. And even to start the season, he had a pretty big role off the bench, but then he really struggled. He fell out of the rotation. Cam Reddish took his spot. Not only took a spot, but then took a starting spot, replaced D'Lo. And then since then, Max has progressively worked his way back into the rotation, and then now the starting lineup. So I'm with you. I think if let's just say it is Austin, Max, DFS, LeBron, and AD, and then the bench is something like for DFS, I mean, there's also the question of like, do they do the Valanciunas trade with Vincent or whatnot? But like, you could do Vincent plus something else for DFS. And let's just say they do that. Then it's like, you still have D'Lo, you still, obviously you have Dalton, but you still have Rui. And if it's like D'Lo, Dalton, Rui, Vando eventually comes back, and then you can kind of figure out the center position. Jackson and Christian are back, or like you do end up trading for Valanciunas. Obviously that's going to change the rotation, but like, I think that's a more formidable two-way group. And I still think that, at least with the current group, the offense is going to carry them. And tonight, I still think like just they couldn't guard AD, and AD had a special night, and that's what he's capable of. And they ran more of the offense through him. I thought Austin didn't shoot well, but did create well with 8 assists. Still had 19 points, what was the second leading scorer. LA's had these weird games recently where they're only having like 3 guys in double figures. And it's often 80 plus like Austin or D'Lo, but when D'Lo is starting, and then like LeBron if he's playing, of course. But it's just been kind of weird in terms of the offensive like output. They've not gotten a lot of bench production. Super chat from Braden. This is what the front office paid Max for. So much potential as a 3-and-D role player in the league. Exactly. And I know I've been the chat has flamed me at times for still believing in Max or whatnot. And look, I'm sure there will be times in the future where he struggles and looks like a 21-year-old in year 3. And I'm sure that the Max haters will come for me in the chat. But I think, it's really tough to nitpick tonight. Like if you're nitpicking tonight, I think you just don't like Max, really, because I thought he had a really, really solid game overall, but especially defensively. I'd love to see the lineup data with him guarding Ja specifically. That's not out yet, but once that's out, I would love to, look at that. Super chat from Angelco Ezorad Rezo. This was the first game this year where the defensive movement and aggression was on point. Max and Cam looked confident in their abilities tonight. The team was focused and motivated. JV and Brogdon. So a lot to unpack. I will say, like, yes. So one thing for me, and I don't know if how much other basketball you guys watch, but in watching the Houston OKC semifinal NBA Cup game, watching that and then watching the Lakers, although tonight was much better defensively, but watching the Lakers in general and then watching that, it's like a different sport. And those two teams are both super athletic, super young, very versatile. You got switchability across multiple positions, and that was like a dogfight. And it, both teams were struggling offensively in part because of the high level defense, but just the level of athletes and the speed and the transition and the raw athleticism on both sides of that matchup was jarring, especially compared to what the Lakers typically look like. And really specifically, it was both defenses' ability to pack the paint on a driver or a post up, but then also scramble and spray back out to shooters and make rotations and be on a string and just all be on the same page. And that's something that the Lakers have really struggled with. JJ talked about it after tonight's game, that he is asking a lot for them to really, to help and then recover and help and recover. And like, it's a lot of movement. It's a lot of scrambling, but I thought they did a really good job tonight. And I do think it helps that I don't love Memphis's offense in general. And I feel like the Lakers, especially with their size, like this is one of the few teams they have, one of the few good teams that they have a pretty convincing size advantage over. Like obviously Zach Edey is a monster and he had a really productive stretch, but like outside of Zach Edey, like AD is bigger than Jaren Jackson and typically does well against him. And LeBron versus Brandon Clark, LeBron's bigger and Brandon Clark had a pretty quiet performance. And then even going through, like, I like Jalen Wells, though he did struggle with foul trouble, but like Bane and Ja are just such a small backcourt, right? Like Bane's about 6'4", Ja's about 6'1", 6'2". So that's actually like a backcourt the Lakers, now they don't have the athleticism advantage over them, but they do have the size. And so to get back to your question, like I thought the movement and the aggression was on point, to your point. And I was really impressed with the Lakers rotations and scrambling, the physicality in the paint. I thought this was one of their better defense. Like they gave up 110 points, more points than they gave up to Minnesota, but I thought it was similar in terms of defensive execution and effectiveness. To the second one, Max and Cam, and I would even throw Gabe in there to a lesser extent, but still give him some credit. Like those three have really wreaked havoc defensively recently, and they've all kind of figured out their roles. Like Cam did have like a step back three that he airballed that I could do without. I don't think he should have taken that shot, but outside of that, like those three predominantly play within themselves offensively and defensively, are each have their own kind of thing. Like Gabe has a strong base and he's really good at bodying people and just kind of being a bit of a pest. Cam is more of a defensive playmaker. He's going to gamble a bit, reach a little bit more, but he's got the length, he's got the athleticism. And then Max is a really good technical defender who has good footwork, uses his hands well. And the guy I've always compared him to is kind of like a Shane Battier. Not as big, not as strong, not as physical, but like in terms of the technical aspect, like it's kind of the high hands. He always has the high hands, and I think he does a good job of mirroring players and like just kind of guarding them in an unorthodox way at times that can kind of throw them off. But those three all were really instrumental tonight from a defensive perspective, and those three have again, I think, kind of found their footing at this point in the season. And then to the last point, I've to continue to beat the same drum. I'm not a big JV guy. I think if it's the right price, if it's 1 or 2 second round picks and it's just Gabe, you could talk me into it, especially with tonight, no Jackson, no Christian Wood, no Vando, no Armel Traore. Then AD goes out. The Lakers just have Christian Coloco, LeBron, and Rui as their only bigs. So tonight was an example of like, sure, they could have used the Jonas Valanciunas for that stretch, but in general, I'm okay with Jonas in a certain role. My fear is that the Lakers might play him a bit more than I think he should be. And if he's coming off the bench and he's like a 15 to 20 minute a night guy, and then that even reduces come playoff time, I'm more okay with that. And if the price is a second or two plus Gabe, that's okay. 3, I'm a little bit iffy on like 3 seconds. Brogdon, I'm not as sold on because of he's a bit older. He's not athletic. He's had a bit of a down shooting year, and he's very injury prone. And he's also making like 22 million. So from a salary matching perspective, that's a little tricky in terms of like you got to get to 33 million for those two. And if it's giving up D'Lo and Rui for JV and Brogdon, or even if, I mean, you don't get there with Gabe and Vando. So I'm Gabe, Vando, and Max, but I wouldn't do that. So I'm not as sold on those two. I'd honestly, if I'm going the second Wizard route, I go for Kuzma personally, because I think a bigger weight, like, and Kuzma, he's got the history with LA, with LeBron and AD, and there was an element of like, I felt like he wanted to stretch his wings a bit, and I don't know if he'd, like, it's kind of, it's different than the Jeremy Grant situation, but it's kind of similar in a way where he wanted to go be the guy or be more of one of the guys somewhere else. And he's done that. And now maybe he's ready to kind of buy into a winning situation and a smaller role. But I'm not as high on Brogdon as some people are. Mohammed Nasser, thank you for the super chat. Let's use swaps and picks. D'Lo, GV, JH. What can we get? Well, so are you using both picks? Are you using Lakers have multiple swaps? I'm assuming that's JHS and Jackson Hayes. I mean, I think Jackson has more value to the Lakers probably than he does elsewhere. So I don't even know if we have to include him here. I might just say D'Lo, Gabe, and JHS. I mean, depending on how many picks and swaps, like you could get into certain conversations, but I don't really anticipate the Lakers using that much draft capital. I'd be pretty surprised. I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one. Like with a pick, you could probably get into the. Is there a way to do like a pick and a swap and a pick in the second round pick, a pick in 2 second round picks for Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith? Like there's been reports that they want 2 firsts for Cam. The Lakers have had conversations in the past about DFS, and I think they've wanted a first before. So it does get like 2 firsts. I mean, you are keeping Rui in this scenario. So I don't know. I mean, among the projected guys to be available, I think you can, with this package, depending on how many picks and swaps you put in, you can get into maybe conversations you wouldn't necessarily expect. But I ultimately think if you're not putting in a player that teams really want, it's gonna require more draft capital, and I don't think the Lakers really want to do that unless. Like, for example, you can't get Jimmy Butler with that salary, right? So even if they were like, let's do 2 picks and 2 swaps, or a swap, or a pick and 2 swaps, whatever, some combination of multiple picks and swaps for Jimmy Butler, and basically keeping the core of the roster together, that doesn't work financially. So it can get like, they can get an upgrade, but I think that the issue here is I'm not quite sure where they're at in terms of using both picks versus 1. And if they're only willing to put 1 on the table, I think that does limit the potential packages. Super chat from Jackson. Could the Lakers trade for Cam Whitmore? That would be ironic, right? After passing on him in the 2023 draft. Potentially, it seems like he's been kind of on the outskirts of Houston's rotation lately. I'm gonna pull up like in the Thunder game, he didn't even play. I'm pulling up his game logs. Yeah, he's only played double-digit minutes in 3 games this season, and one of those was a blowout. So it's kind of wild. I mean, Houston's deep, they're athletic, but from a last year, he averaged 19 minutes a game. He's down to 10, 12 points last year, 6 points this year. Shooting has gone from 45% last year to 38% this year. 3-point shooting has gone from 36% down to 5%, but he's only played in 8 games and only played 10 minutes. So he's only played 80 minutes this season. I think it's certainly possible. Just depends, like if you're going to try trade JHS to Houston for Cam Whitmore, they're probably going to ask for it first or multiple seconds. So first is probably too much. But I also don't think they're going to particularly care for JHS. So I would say, I mean, if you could get it for if you could do JHS for like 2 seconds for Cam, I would be open to that. I think he would help. I don't know if Houston's going to want to help the Lakers, but I mean, he seems to potentially be available. Kane Carter, hey Jovan, how is the Balkan Boys Club from 2020? Shout out. So Kane, you ask some off the beaten path questions that I do enjoy. So for context, I'm half Serbian. My name Jovan is a Serbian name. Buha is also Serbian, and I did a story in the bubble. I was not in the bubble, but I talked to the right people and did a story on the Balkan Boys, which was the group of Jokic, Doncic, Boban, Goran Dragic, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and Ivica Zubac, and I'm probably missing one or two, but it was a group of the NBA players from the Balkan countries and the former Yugoslavia, and they all kind of formed this bond where, despite a lot of similarities, but also some differences depending on the country and depending on the history, they all came together and were singing Serbian and Bosnian and Croatian songs and drinking rakia, which is Serbian / Balkan brandy, and it was a really cool story for me because once they had some pictures from there, and like once I kind of knew that was a thing, I was like, I need to write on this, because also there wasn't much to write on back then, but to write a feature on that was really cool, and it was one of the stories I'm most proud of, and to this day, and yeah, so that's wish I was there drinking some rakia with them and singing some songs, but I just had to do it from outside the bubble. Super chat from AH. LAL should go for Sharp. Jonas a traffic cone on D. We are in alignment. I've mentioned Sharp as if he's a guy that you could kind of throw in a potential Cam or DFS trade. I would be open to that. So I think Sharp would be a great addition, especially as a low cost gamble / flyer. Kronos, thank you for the super chat. If JV happens, chances it's an expanded deal. Kuz, my read on it would likely be a smaller kind of. I think the package that's been out there has been Gabe and a second or two. I think even 3 seconds has been thrown out recently. I think it would probably be that, and it would be the Lakers trying to address the backup center spot, and then seeing how that kind of works the next like a month or so, and then late January, early February, before the February 6th trade deadline, then kind of reevaluating the group and seeing who's healthy, what do they need, who's playing well, who's not playing well, etc. So I think I've said it before. I think they should be more aggressive. I think they should be trying to make these moves ASAP. That's not the sense I'm getting right now. Like the JV move could be an exception to that in terms of making a move within tomorrow, a week, a couple weeks, like whatever it could happen at any kind of point over the next month. I also think there's a chance Washington could just stand pat and ask for a first, a protected first, or they could ask for 3 seconds, and maybe the Lakers don't want to give up 3 seconds, and they could be like, well, look at all these teams that need a backup center. If you go roster by roster, there are some good teams that need a backup center, and maybe they could kind of create a bidding war if the Lakers aren't willing to overpay, in the short term. So that's also a possibility of this kind of getting dragged out and it being something of a bidding war. They have had conversations. So I would assume that it ends up being a smaller deal and is just JV and for Gabe or whatever's the matching salary. But certainly Brogdon or Kuzma could be a potential add-in, and that's a bigger trade. But then, as I mentioned, with JV's making 11, Brogdon's making 22.5. That's 33.5 million. Lakers cannot take back more money in any trade. So Lakers have to get to 33.5 million. You throw in Gabe, you still have 22.5 million left. And there's only so many ways they can get there, because you also have to factor in, you can't just throw like 5 guys together and just send them to Washington. Like Washington then has to figure out, are we waiving guys? It becomes a bit of a problem on their end. It's not that simple. Or then they ask for more stuff of like, okay, well, if we have to go through all this trouble of figuring out waiving guys or trying to reroute guys and make it a 3-team trade or something, like we want an extra second round pick or something. So I would assume, if it's Brogdon or Kuzma, I assume it probably expands to a first round pick from LA side. And I don't know if they're going to want to do that. So for now, I would say if JB happens, JV, not JB, I'm JB. If that happens, I think it's more of a short-term deal. Angelico, again, thank you for the super chat. Is there a possibility of signing Fultz? I know Anthony Irwin has reported that. I have personally not reported that. I think it's been interesting that he has not had much of a market and not been signed by anybody. Especially if the Lakers end up moving Gabe and D'Lo, I think Fultz is more attractive to me as like a low risk, high upside replacement. I think the one big thing with him, aside from like he's had some injury stuff, but for me it's more just the shooting. And I really think that because I don't think the Lakers are ever going to be a great shooting team, but I also think you can make the problem worse by just kind of being like, well, we're not going to be a good shooting team and we're going to be a low volume shooting team. So screw it. Let's like kind of punt on shooting. And like, I just don't think shooting is something you could punt on in 2024/2025. So that's my one hesitation with Fultz is like there's already some shooting limitations within the rotation. And look, can he shoot much worse than Gabe Vincent has shot at times this season? Probably not. But Gabe's quietly, he's shooting 38% in his last 10 games on threes. Tonight he was 1 for 3, so that definitely dropped. But like Gabe's been shooting the ball better and looking a bit more like himself. So I would be open to it depending on the context of how they're adding Fultz. But I'm maybe a little bit more skeptical because of the shooting. J.R. Madrano, thank you for the super chat. What do you think the actual vision is with Jonas? One thing that I've talked about before is LeBron was a fan, and dating back to the summer, it seems like AD is a fan as well. JJ had the comment over the summer about the Lakers needing a big bruising center, and that is something that they've needed. And going back to even the 2023 offseason when they signed Christian Wood, another guy that they were considering at that time was Bismack Biyombo. And Bismack Biyombo, was statistically one of the better rim protectors that previous season, and was is a bit relatively undersized because he's about like 6'9", but he does have some athleticism, some length, and just good timing in terms of altering shots, blocking shots, etc. Can be a bit foul prone, not a great rebounder, but they were going it like, I think if Christian Wood does not pick the Lakers among the minimum teams he was picking between, I think that they end up with Bismack Biyombo. That was a guy that they had circled, and that was largely because of the defensive end and what they felt he could bring. So this has been something they've been aware of now for a year and a half at least, but and really for longer, because they've shuffled like every year. It's a new cast of 2 to 3 backup centers that they're trying to kind of figure out behind AD, and they just can't do it. So my read is, I think LeBron and AD both like him and like the physicality. I think like one thing with players is players are not always the best judges of talent, and they tend to like guys with like a pedigree. And Jonas is a guy with a pedigree. He's been a starter for over a half decade. He's been a guy who's been in the playoffs. He has been a good scoring big man, by relative standards. Not like an all-star, but kind of in that second or third tier of like scoring centers. Nice pick and pop jumper, bit of a post game, and he's certainly regressed and like doesn't have that stuff at the same level. But my thinking on the vision is I just think they view him as a big body who could bang with Jokic, bang with some of the bigs around the league, and kind of just be that placeholder. Now, I've no indication that they think he's a starter or like high level minute guy, but if they do, that would be a red flag. Like if the vision, I've said this before, but if the vision here is start Jonas Valanciunas and play him 25 to 30 minutes a night and try to go back to the 2020 model and have AD at the 4 and LeBron at the 3. I have a huge issue with this. And I just like comparing Jonas Valanciunas to 2020 JaVale McGee or 2020 Dwight Howard defensively is like, it's just not in the same ballpark. And those guys had their flaws, and they were often played off the floor. But by the time it was like a important high stakes moment outside of the Denver series where Dwight was really important, but like then LA could go with AD at the 5 and Markieff Morris at the 4 or Kyle Kuzma at the 4 or LeBron at the 4, and they had that versatility there. But as long as they're not viewing him as a starter and like a huge piece, I don't love it, but I've come around to it a little bit more. If it's like this guy's a starter and a closer and he's our 4th or 5th most important player, like, and again, there's no indications that's that, but again, my fear would just be like, do they start this guy and play him a certain amount of minutes? Because we've seen that before. We saw it with Andre Drummond in 2 totally different situations, but I just have a little bit of apprehension with this whole situation based on like the fact that LeBron is willing to take a pay cut for him. That to me was a bit of a red flag, because that's you don't take a pay cut necessarily for a backup setter, in my opinion, right? Like you take a pay cut for a starter. You take or like someone that you're boys with or have a history with, and to my knowledge, LeBron and Jonas don't have this. They're not vacationing in Ibiza or the Caribbean or they're not boys like that, to my knowledge. And so it's kind of like if he was willing to take a pay cut for that guy, that was probably going to be a backup center playing 18 to 20 minutes a night in my head, but maybe he was going to be a starter. And if he was a starter, like I have more issues with this. So I think they view him offensively. Like, I think part of it's just like a big body that they kind of need, and it could be like a if they really need a Jackson or a Christian, and I'm sure they'll if they get Jonas, they'll probably move one of those guys. Maybe even in that deal, but maybe in a separate deal. But kind of the optionality of one of the one offensive minded center, and I mean I would argue they're all offensive minded centers, but I think for them, it's like he's a big body who could be physical. And I think there's way more to defense than that, as we've seen, but I digress. I have a couple more super chats here. I haven't really gotten to the chat. I do apologize. I've had a lot of super chats, which I do appreciate. Ryan Jeffries here. After this, I'll go. I've gone over as to be expected, but I'll go 5 more minutes of the non super chat, unless someone sends a super chat, and then I'll figure it out. Ryan Jeffries, thoughts on Lonzo to be the main POA defender. I've said this with Lonzo multiple times. I just think you got to see him healthy for a stretch, like a significant stretch. Otherwise, because of the contract and potentially what you'd have to give up to match salary, it is a bit of a risk that's too rich for my blood. Now, the theory of Lonzo, I think, fits well. Like, in theory, you add Lonzo, you move Max to the bench, and you kind of get the best of both worlds, where offensively he's improved as a shooter. He's clearly capable as a ball handler, playmaker, passer, but then he's got the size and the defense. So, you're getting a plus defender in the backcourt, but you're also getting a plus playmaker, and that's something that it's kind of blending. Like, it's shades of D'Lo, and of course he doesn't have the offensive ceiling or the scoring ceiling or the shooting ceiling as D'Lo, but like shades of D'Lo in terms of the importance of the playmaking, the passing, the ball handling. You're getting that next to Austin and LeBron, but then defensively, you're also getting that point of attack, athletic big guard. So I would, if he can show that he's healthy for a sustained stretch, I would be open to that. Also depending on the price, but if not, I have some concerns. Okay. Let's go to Bloodhound. Need wings, a backup center, and an athletic guard. Those are the 3 needs that the Lakers have. I think there's a chance, like, Max Christie's emergence to me can help make the latter one less of a need, but I still think it's probably a need. But to me, the first one's the biggest need. I continue to think that, like, the Lakers need a at least one big 3-and-D wing, if not a couple, and maybe that's Max. I view him more as like a 2 or 2.5 rather than, like, I think when I'm talking big wings, it's more like a 3.5 or like a 4 with some versatility. But that's, to me, the biggest need, and having 1 or 2 of those guys. Better backup center for sure, I think, or at least a more defensive-minded backup center. And then I think if you've addressed those 2, you can add the athletic guard. You could also kind of split the difference of, like, one 3-and-D wing, 1 athletic guard, 1 backup center. But yeah, I mean, those are the 3 biggest needs for sure, in my opinion. Dark Galaxy should be DFS. Yeah, I've been on the DFS train for 2 years. I've felt that that's a great fit. I know he's had some up and down shooting, but this year he's shooting well. So now when he gets to the Lakers, we'll see based on their track record. But where's the balance? D'Lo is just so unserious. Yeah, I thought tonight was a very unserious performance from him. It's tough, and I thought Darius Soriano wrote a great piece on Silver Screen and Roll about he was making the case to keep D'Lo and just his importance, especially with his plus minus. But I agree with him. I largely agree with what he wrote, and I think if there's a way to keep D'Lo, I would be open to that if I'm the Lakers. But I also think, like, it's just like the lows are just so low. And like, we just saw the high against Portland, 28-14. That was one of the best, if not arguably best, non-LeBron or AD game by any Laker this season. It's in the conversation, if not the front runner. But then he has a night like tonight where he's just kind of out there. And I thought had some pretty egregious. Like, D'Lo's a low turnover guy. Tonight he had 3 turnovers to 2 assists. It's just, yeah, it was a pretty unserious performance. Kwabena Asari, Cam Johnson is similar to Michael Porter Jr. Yes. I mean, I think he's having a better season than Michael Porter Jr., if I'm not mistaken. And I actually think he's better defensively. I think MPJ's like offensive ceiling is probably a bit higher, and he's a better rebounder. Well, let me rephrase. His offensive ceiling against the Lakers is much higher because he does not. I mean, dude had a 10 for 10 game against the Lakers last year. He's just he I don't know. He takes it personally against the Lakers, but I mean, they are like from a proto, like a positional skill set perspective, that they are pretty similar. Entering the season, I would have said Michael Porter Jr. is clearly better, but like based on this season, Cam, Dark Galaxy, Jovan, what do you think DFS and Cam Johnson would be worth given Dennis's price? This is a good question, and this is something that, so I'm gonna have a story coming out on The Athletic about trade stuff and some reporting and just kind of like a trade primer, asking some questions. I'm also going to do an episode of Buha's Block. That'll be the next one on a Tuesday afternoon/evening, of kind of going through that story and talking a little bit more in depth in each kind of section, each question. But I do think if there's a positive for the Lakers based on the way that these first couple trades went, and this is something I've talked about, that often the first trades dictate the market and set the price, set the standard. And the fact that they were able to get Dennis without giving up a first round pick, I think is very encouraging for the Lakers. And they did give up 3 seconds. So that does set, maybe this is the trade deadline of like a bunch of second round picks. It's like, instead of a first round pick for a guy or like a protected first, it's like 3 seconds. And that ends up being the kind of like in vogue price for some of these guys. But I would say it definitely helps in terms of being able to point to, well, this is the price you accepted for Dennis compared to some of these guys. I would say that, again, there's been floated out there the asking price of 2 first round picks for Cam Johnson. Asking prices are rarely met unless it's like a superstar. So I could see Cam going for like a first or maybe a first and a second or something. DFS seems like it's been a first, and maybe that comes down to like a couple seconds. So I would argue that though Dennis is having a better season than DFS, like in general, DFS is like every team could use another wing. So I think there's a chance that the market ultimately dictates that. Like Dennis is another one of these guys that, and I know even within the Laker fan base, but like Dennis is a bit of a polarizing player. Like he was putting up great numbers, 18-6 career high, I believe field goal and 3-point percentage this year, having a career year. But he's not everyone's cup of tea. And there are detractors around the league in terms of how they view Dennis and just the personality. He's bounced around a lot. Some of the shot selection, the inefficiency, the turnovers, etc. So I think like a backup / like starting guard, small backup / starting guard is not as valuable league wide as a 6'8", 6'9", 3-and-D wing. And similar, like Cam Johnson's younger and has been better than DFS this season, and like he's having a career shooting year. So I'm not quite sure. I think that the fallout of the Dennis situation is still, but in talking, having conversations, it sounded like that there's a little bit more optimism that some of these prices might go down, just not only specifically with the Nets, but maybe league wide. I would guess that DFS is probably, in terms of a value, probably like a protected first or a couple, 2 to 3 seconds. Cam is probably an unprotected first, and maybe like throwing in a second, and that would probably be how I'd value those two guys. But I would say that's lower than what the asking price has been, and I think again that the Dennis thing factors in. Thank Charlie. MPJ doesn't play D. Yeah, I mean that's why Cam Johnson's a better defender, and Cam Johnson's not even like, I don't even think he's a good defender, but compared to MPJ, we also have to factor in that there's a Lakers tax, a desperation tax, so maybe the Lakers have to end up paying more. Bang Charlie, Jovan, do you think a trade will happen in the next few games or later into the trade season? I've been saying later. I think the one exception would be JV. Maybe the Lakers try and just, especially with tonight, with like having that, there was a 6-minute stretch in this game where their only available big men were Christian Koloko, LeBron James, and Rui Hachimura. If that doesn't send an alarm that you got to do something, like, I don't think they could keep banking on Christian Wood, Jared Vanderbilt, even Jackson Hayes to come back in a reasonable amount of time. Like if those guys are even out 2 more weeks, that's a critical stretch, for them to miss. That's 2 games in Sacramento, Detroit, Golden State, Sacramento again, Cleveland. Like that's too much important basketball for those guys to miss. So I think with Valanciunas and the backup center spot in general, there's a bit more urgency. So that's the one I could see happening sooner. But in general, with the way, like, it tends to be that first couple weeks of the trade season that there are like 2 to 4 trades. Then it kind of really starts to pick up like mid to late January. So I think the Lakers are still trying to be a bit patient with some of the injuries and see one of these guys is going to be back. What's that going to look like? But so I would say, I think if they make a move, it's JV. If not, and maybe I would say could be JV. Could also be Brooklyn though, because Brooklyn is the Dennis move was partially, I think, Golden State trying to address the Melton injury, and they haven't been playing well as much recently. But Brooklyn's also trying to tank now. So if Cam Johnson and DFS are helping them win games, maybe they're like, we gotta just trade these guys. So I think I would say a Washington or Brooklyn trade would be one of the 2 trades I could see happening sooner. But outside of that, I think most of the other names or rumored teams are probably going into January. Okay, Norris, do you feel that other? So the second to last question, I'll do one more after this. Do you feel that other teams deal in bad faith with the Lakers besides Washington? It sounds impossible to get trades done with other teams. I've talked about this, so I do believe in a little bit of a Lakers tax. I think that the Lakers just being the Lakers and being, if we're being honest, like being the golden franchise of the NBA, and I don't say that to offend any other fan bases or franchises, but it's just like the Lakers have a global fan base that it's just, if you count the number of Laker fans of the world, it is greater than any other fan base in the NBA. Like that's just is what it is. And I know that the Warriors have been a big riser over the past decade. The Knicks have MSG in New York, and like they'll always be the Knicks. And Boston, of course, is the other historical glamour franchise, but different situation. But the Lakers are the Lakers, and I think just going through, always remember the reaction to like the Pau Gasol trade and Greg Popovich going against it, and even the reaction to the Chris Paul trade in 2011 momentarily. Like, just anytime there's big trades that help the Lakers, I feel like the league. It's like there's few things the league could agree on, but hating the Lakers is one of them. It seems to be. Now, I think it's more of it's less so a Lakers tax though, and more so a desperation tax. And I think there's been a clear. It's just been clear that with LeBron and AD, there's been a very short window. So in terms of just like, trying to compete and trying to maximize that the group and the supporting cast. So I think if anything, it's just Lakers have already spent a bunch of their assets with various trades, and they actually have access to a lot of their firsts. They could just only trade them because they've done other trades, because of the swap with the Pelicans, and then the first to Utah from the Russ trade, still paying for the sins of the Russ trade. Or paying to get out of the Russ trade. But because of that, they don't have as much access to the first round pick. So people are like, it's also some of the contracts that they've signed that don't have value, or neutral to negative value, as I've said countless times. So it's like a combination of all of that. Of they don't really have all these attractive contracts that people want. Then they also have limited assets, but then people know everyone knows the Lakers have 2 first round picks to trade. How many other teams is everyone kind of like rattling off the top of their head of they could trade this? And part of it's how much coverage the Lakers get and whatnot. But like everyone, like it's just kind of a thing. So I also think that they're trying to leverage them for everything they can get out of them. So I think it's more of a like desperation. We're going to ask for the moon because we know you have a year and a half left with LeBron and AD, more so than anything else. But certainly, I think the Lakers just being who they are has not helped, because I think teams don't really want to help them. Dark Galaxy, do you think DeJounte Murray could be an option for the Lakers? I don't. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't. I think New Orleans probably keeps him. Okay, getting to I said I was going to do one more, but that one, Dark Galaxy, I appreciate as a moderator. Okay. Well, something just happened to chat. Okay. Michael D, Late Night Gang. Yes, I've stopped for some reason saying Late Night Gang, but I need to bring the branding back. Okay, I missed a super chat. All right, well, we'll get out of here on this one. Thank you, King Carter, for the super chat. Was Utah the only team that wanted to help in 2023? Also, what would have happened if they chose Conley over D'Lo? Thoughts on Kuz while he was here? Polarizing. Utah was not the only team that wanted to help. They had some talks with, I believe, Brooklyn and Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, about potential Russ trades, but Utah was the one that had been most heavily linked to them, and from like a logistical perspective, it kind of made the most sense. They've kind of been a way station recently in terms of just getting random role players and or helping facilitating trades to accumulate assets. If they chose Conley over D'Lo, it's interesting because, like, I don't know. I know there are people like Zach Lowe has been someone who's been vocal about Conley over D'Lo, and I know there's other smart people who have said Conley over D'Lo. I think in general, Conley's a more stable player. I feel like he has aged and regressed this season. Now, D'Lo's also not had a great season. So, and Conley's been now a part of, a couple of good Minnesota teams. And last year they made the conference finals. So it kind of showed you can make a conference finals with him as your starting point guard at this stage of his career. I think it's close. I actually I think D'Lo's clearly the more talented player and the ceiling is higher, but I think Conley is a better night to night defender and just a more kind of stable caretaker of the offense. I do think D'Lo, he had ties to the Lakers previously, being a former draft pick and was a couple years removed from being a former All-Star. And, that's one that it is an interesting sliding doors moment. I don't know if it makes a huge difference. And I think like Conley, Austin, you still have some size and athleticism problems with that backcourt. But I think D'Lo was more of an upside play from the Lakers. And also I think more of a nostalgia play. I would say, I don't know, because I do think D'Lo's like highs have been higher, but it's just more of a roller coaster where Conley is just kind of like a steady, like solid player. So I'm not like, again, I know there's a lot of smart people that say Conley over D'Lo. I'm like this year, I don't know, but in general, I think it's pretty close. I'd honestly probably lean D'Lo, but I'd also say that there's some more complications with D'Lo and the role and the buy-in and stuff that I don't think you have the same, like Conley's like I did a story on him years ago for ESPN, and like he still, every time we see each other, he's always cool with me. And like, he's just by all accounts, one of like the nicest dudes in the league. Like I've never heard anyone say a negative thing about Mike Conley. So, yeah, but I understand the D'Lo. Like I think they're going for upside there. And then thoughts on Kuz. I think he was in the right role, to be honest. Like I think, he ultimately showed, similar to Jeremy Grant. Like there are these guys that kind of view themselves more as like a scorer and don't want to just do the dirty work or the role player stuff. And now I think the Lakers also could have done a better job of like probably just at some point starting Kuz and making him the starting three and just saying, we're going to go, I guess kind of like a better version of Rui, of we're just going to go Kuz, LeBron, and AD. And like, that's going to be the starting front court. The polarizing part, like, he obviously off the court, the dating and the fashion and the social media or whatever, the fits, it doesn't bother me. Like, I think it's part of being an NBA player, and maybe he leaned into it too much a bit, but that doesn't bother me. I think obviously I had a pretty big ego, but I also think he played really well as a rookie and kind of backed it up. But ultimately, I think it was kind of a situation where he just needed to go stretch his wings, go somewhere else, experience new situation. And I think now I doubt it's with the Lakers, but I think he is probably ready to go back to a winning situation and be more of like that fourth guy rather than trying to be like the first or second guy with Washington. But on that note, I did end up going over 30 extra minutes. What can I tell you? I'm a professional yapper, apparently. But I appreciate you all so much for watching and listening. As a reminder, I'll be going live on tomorrow or later today, 5 p.m. on Monday, December 16th. So if I didn't get to your questions, I apologize, but I'm trying to do the best I can here. But I we'll talk to you all a little bit later today, hopefully. Shout out to the late night gang. And again, thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're not yet subscribed, if you're an hour and a half into this, please consider subscribing. Please turn on channel notifications so you don't miss a video or future live stream. And please like the video. Like as people have said in the past, we got all these people watching, not enough likes. So let's get those likes up. And then comment if you want me to make you a moderator. I know there's a few of you that requested it that I need to add. I apologize for not yet adding you, but let me know if you want to be a moderator. Also, let me know if you have a question for a future mailbag or just a question you want me to answer. And then for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back later today at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I will talk to you then. Shout out to the late night gang. Hope you all have a great night, day. I know some of you morning, afternoon, whatever it is. Have a great day. Have a great night. I appreciate you. Thank you for watching and supporting.